This is the Squire 50's classic vibe. You know, there's a lot of YouTube content out there that gets you really sucked into really expensive gear. I like expensive gear, but there's some really good stuff out there that's affordable too. And I think if you get things set up right, it doesn't really matter how expensive the gear was. It matters how well it's set up and if it's got all the tools that you need to make the sounds that you want to hear. I will say the amp that you're playing through, I think, is very important. I'd rather have a cheap guitar going through an expensive amp than an expensive guitar going into a cheap amp. But when it came to these Squires, a few people that I know bought some Squires to kind of start off with, and I helped them get them set up, and I played them, and I noticed two things. There wasn't a whole lot of flaws in the factory setup, which is really surprising. And these things played and sounded great. So I want to show you this guitar today. When this came to me, it had a really nice setup from factory. I made a few changes just to make sure all the strings are set up to follow the radius of the fretboard, which is a little off on a couple. It came with action about a millimeter and a quarter off the fretboard all the way across. And I did find that on the low strings, with these 9-42s on it, I was getting quite a bit of buzz. I'm still getting a little bit of buzz. Now the frets are level and they're really nicely polished. The fret ends are smooth. They're not beveled too far into the fretboard. They're rounded. This guitar, if I were to look at it and I didn't know it was a Squire, I would think it's $1,000 plus. I've been playing guitars for a long time and I've seen a lot of stuff out there, and there's really nothing I could fault on this guitar other than I gotta go through this nut a little bit better. Not to set the height of the nut. The nut string heights are perfect, but I am getting a little bit of binding in there. I added some graphite nut sauce stuff and that's helping, but I still do get a little bit of binding. I don't expect a guitar to stay in tune, a Strat style guitar to stay in tune when you're playing with the tremolo bar. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying after a little bit of just normal bending and playing around on the guitar, I am getting a little bit of tuning issues. It's nothing major, and I think if I just kind of run a little bit of fine grit sandpaper through those slots and just kind of finish them up a little bit, I'm willing to bet it's not going to be an issue. A lot of people look to the tuner. The tuner is almost never the issue on the guitar. It's usually the nut, and if not the nut, there's something else going on in the bridge there. The other thing I did was this guitar came decked, and it was decked hard. Like the springs in the back were so tight that it took me many, many, many turns to get this thing to just sit where it's just barely floating off of the body. Let me see if I can get a shot of that. It's going to be tricky. You can kind of see there's like a little bit of a gap to where it's just barely sitting off the body there. Yeah, and that's how I like my tremolo. I like it to be, the only reason I want it to float a little bit is because I don't want it to make a sound as it comes back and impacts the body. I want it to look pretty much decked, but I don't want it to go crink against the body if I were to manipulate this tremolo arm a little bit. I want it to have that stability of that angle, because if I have it really floating off, anything I do here has all this leverage to pull the bridge upward. But if I have it laid flat, it has nowhere to go. And that creates more tuning stability, but I don't want it to deck against the body like that. So that's how I like my floating bridges set up. But this guitar is great. I'll give you guys some sound samples here. Going into the Maz 18, I got my pedal board down here. I'll run some sounds through, but for now, nothing on but a little bit of reverb. I got the amp set pretty clean. You guys know I like running my bass knob a little bit low. This guitar's got a lot of low end and a lot of top end. I'm turning the tone knobs, both tone knobs, down to about maybe 8, to where you just start to notice it's rolling off the top end. That's how I like my sounds. I'll start with the neck position. Let's do position 4. That's pretty sweet sound. For the price of this guitar, stock pickups, I've done nothing but set it up. Middle position. Position 2, it's probably my least favorite sound on the Strat, and definitely my least favorite sound on this Strat, but it's still pretty good for what it is. And then as I'm playing it, I realize that's a pretty badass sound. Here's the bridge. This is how I typically would run, you know, my bass sound. I normally don't just go straight into the amp like that. I normally have the Greer light speed on, boosting a little bit of volume, and the drive knob is set just above noon, just so it's adding a little bit. It has a slight bit of compression. Single coils into a very clean amp are super transient. Nobody wants to hear that. It's like a sharp piercing transient and then the note dies off. That's just the nature of that type of a sound. It's not good. When you're playing in a band too, you need a little bit of compression. People talk about, oh, we don't want, you know, I've heard some players, oh, we don't want any compression and stuff. They might say that, but there's always a little bit of compression if they're adding any sort of drive whatsoever, or they're going into a really hot amp. The amp is compressing, and you need that in order to be heard past the transient. Like, yeah, you might be able to poke through with the transient, but what's happening to the rest of the note? So, gotta have a little bit of drive going, in my opinion. Here's neck pickup with just that Greer light speed. Let's do position 4. Yeah, and you got the middle position. I like the middle position on this guitar a lot. All right, position 2, bridge in middle. All right, now bridge. All right, let's get into some interesting sounds here. What happens when we add more gain? I'm gonna stack the green side of the brown protein on that. What happens if we do that on the neck? Pretty sweet. Okay, another thing I like to do, I was kind of messing around. I'm going to botch this riff. I just kind of was messing around with it. I'm going to put the Walrus Monument V2 in the harmonic tremolo setting. It sounds like this. And then I'm going to stack on, I have a StewMac kit that's modeled after an Analog Man sun face. And I'm going to go to the bridge and check this out. This thing sounds massive. It plays great, sounds great. Everybody's like, oh, I'm gonna modify this and that. I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna do anything with it. I think it's done. I think it's done. The only thing I might do, I'm one of those guys that has soft, sweaty hands. And especially when I'm like playing live, I'll feel that feeling. Now this neck, I usually can't even play a gloss neck. Like I can't even get around it. This one isn't so sticky. It's a me problem. But yeah, I might rough it up on the back. But man, there's nothing wrong with this guitar. I don't see any issue with it. Get those pickup heights set up nice. Get that action dialed in. The neck relief. You know, maybe a little bit of work on that nut slot just to make sure it's playing perfect. I was able to get this thing, I got it set up at a 1.5 millimeters on the low, down to 1.25 millimeters on the high E, following that radius, so it's kind of slowly tapering down from 1.5 millimeters to 1.25 millimeters. It's playing good. Very, very subtle buzz just on the initial impact of the note, and then it rings clean all the way up the neck, not a dead spot on it. This thing's fantastic. I don't see any reason to spend more than it unless that's something that you want, which, hey, I like nice guitars too, but this thing is gonna do you wonders. So, all right, guys, let me know what you think about the Squire stuff these days. This is that classic vibe, like I said. Are there any better budget Strats out there for that kind of money? I think it's in the $400 range. Are there any better Strat style guitars or any better Fender style guitars out there for that kind of money? I'd love to know. And if you guys have any suggestions for future videos, let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for ideas. I don't get a chance to do these as often as I would like, and sometimes when I come around to it, I just want to make sure I'm giving you guys the stuff that you want to see. So, all right, guys, hope you have a good day. We'll talk soon. Bye.